Hey, what's up everyone? It's Shamrocked here with a dungeon guide for you. This is for Galakrond's Fall 28 with Fortified, Entangling, and Bolstering as the affixes. Keep in mind this is a full dungeon guide, but I will bookmark the different sections like the first area, second area, third area, and fourth area so that you can just kind of go there if that's what you're looking for. Before getting into the dungeon, let's look at the talents. So if you've been following any of my videos, my recent ones, for any of the fall bosses, this is pretty much what I have. I feel like I've sort of, in my opinion, cracked the code for this dungeon. In terms of what talents we can take, this build, in my opinion, is perfect. It has everything you need to get through all of the bosses, all of the trash, and it also has good survivability as well. So looking at the left side, I am taking Thunderous Paws this week just because it is an entangling week. However, for Galakrond's Fall, if I didn't need this point in like for the affix, so technically this would be my flex point. So I'd either have it Thunderous Paws for entangling, I'd have it as Poison Cleansing Totem for afflicted. I'd rejig this so that I could have Hex as if it were incorporeal, and so on and so forth. But if I didn't need this flex point for an affix, so if the affixes didn't have any bearing on my talents, I would probably put this point into Earth Elemental for that extra defensive. Or even, I mean, maybe Mana Spring if you think you're having mana issues, but I actually personally think Earth Elemental would be a little bit more worth now that I've sort of figured out the right side and figured out the exact method for me on how to heal that last boss without running out of mana. Keep in mind, Stone Skin Totem, I highly do not recommend for this dungeon. The majority of the damage is magic damage, so technically this would just be a wasted point, even on Fortified keys. So it's better spent elsewhere. I also have both points into Elemental Warding, which is for 2 points you get to reduce all magic damage taken by 4%. This will help you throughout the entire dungeon, so I do highly recommend for this place on higher keys. Especially because on the second, I mean, on a fortified week with the second area, like you might only live by like 1% health, and this might be the reason why. So once again, highly recommend this. Moving on to the right side, this is my pretty standard build that I've been running for Tyrannical keys. I actually don't necessarily run this for Fortified keys. I don't always put the points into Current Control, Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem, or Mana Side Totem. However, for Galakrond's Fall, I do. And the reason for that is, first of all, you don't need any of your DPS talents because Galakrond's Fall is basically a free key if you can survive. And you can even probably wipe once throughout the dungeon and maybe still be okay, even on higher keys. But realistically, the name of the game for Galakrond's Fall is just keep your players alive and you will time the key. So that's why there's no DPS talents here. And then the reason I've Mana Tide and Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem is because you're going to get 2 to 3 uses of this on the last boss. And the last boss is like a huge, it's a very long fight, and it's kind of like a marathon. You need to be very conservative with your mana. You need to know what spells to press and when. You just need to be smart about it. And this talent will definitely help with that. And on the same vein, I also have Current Control, which basically just gives you another Healing Tide use during that last fight as well. So this whole talent build is basically geared towards that last boss fight, because that's usually going to be the make it or break it for your key, assuming you get there everything else. Okay, and with all of that, let's move on to the dungeon. All right, so I have split this dungeon up into sections, and I've actually sped up this first part just because it is the easier part. There's not a whole lot I can say about it, but with that being said, I will go through the pulls that we did as well as the technique for the boss. So for this first area, I find the most successful routes for Fall skip this first area. You actually either use an Invis Pot or Shroud, and then just go down to the bottom of the stairs and you pull the pack down there with the boss. Because it's bolstering, we actually can't do that because the Epoch Rippers will get too bolstered and they have a very high likelihood of one-shotting somebody with the little spinny thing that they do. And if it happens during the boss, then it's unfortunate because you have to waste battle res. And if it happens twice, then you're kind of screwed for the key. So because of that, we're actually splitting this up into 2 pulls. Well, actually 3 if you include the boss. So this pull up here, then we're going to pull the trash at the bottom of the stairs, and then we're going to go into the boss. But in my opinion, I think it's better to actually skip this first area. And the reason is because if you skip this first area, then you don't have to skip the last area. And that means you'll be able to pot twice for the last boss instead of just once. But that's just my opinion. A lot of groups will just skip the last area and do this area. So it really doesn't matter that much. Like I said, this is a key where if you live, you time. So yeah, just whatever you guys feel comfortable with. The mobs you have to worry about here are the Chrono Weavers. So they're going to channel a really nasty spell on a DPS or a healer, and it's going to kill them pretty quickly, so somebody just needs to be watching those guys and make sure they're interrupting them. They can also be stopped with knockups and knockbacks. And yeah, it's called Chrono Melt. It just happened right there. So usually myself, I will target a Chrono Weaver and I will just stick on them and I will interrupt them as soon as it comes up. The other ad to worry about here is the Epoch Ripper. So every so often, I think it's like 15 or 20 seconds, it will teleport to a random DPS or the healer, and it will just start whirlwinding on them. And it does damage instantly. You can't really avoid that first tick unless you're super fast, like a Demon Hunter. Maybe you felt rush out of it or something like that. So if you know it's coming out and it's a bowstring like this week and it has a lot of stats, stacks of the bowstring, really your only option is to use a defensive when you think it's going to come out, and just in case it hits you, which you'll actually see I do. I'll point it out. You'll see my Astral Shift comes up right here, and I can see I have the weak aura that shows their ability cooldowns on the nameplates, which is what you're seeing above their nameplates there. And I can see that this Chrono Ripper is about to have his ability come up, and so I'm going to use Astral Shift because yeah, there was a likelihood that he was going to hit me, and he did. And thankfully I used Astral Shift because it still chunked me for like 60% of my health, so it probably would have killed me. The only other ad to worry about in this area is the one that channels a stacking debuff on the tank that increases the amount of damage that they take. So just it's stoppable with this. It has to be a hard stun. It's not like a knockup or a knockback. So usually the group can stop it, but even if they can't, just make sure you're dispelling your tanks at like 3 or 4 stacks. It's okay if they end up with 1 or 2 after the channel finishes, but you definitely don't want them to have like more than 5 because it can really hurt them. All right, this boss is fairly easy. The name of the game is to just keep the sand to a minimum. It's basically like an area denial fight. So as the fight goes on, more sand is going to come out and you kind of run out of room. So it's important to sort of compress and compact the sand as much as possible and just make sure you're dropping your pools as close to the edge or as close to other sand puddles as you possibly can. Keep in mind that, especially on a tyrannical week, if you do happen to be slow getting out of the sand and you take an extra tick, there is a chance it will kill you, like I said, especially on a higher tyrannical key. So just make sure you prioritize getting out of the sand ASAP, and everybody else in your group should as well. Even though people take damage from that first tick, as long as they're getting out right away, they shouldn't die. So you shouldn't necessarily have to worry about like stopping and healing people. Just prioritize getting out, and then you can top people up afterwards. The other ability this guy does is the jump. So he's going to pick a random target and he's going to jump there, and then he's going to pick a second random target and he's going to jump there as well. When he jumps, there's going to be these like chrono shard things that come out everywhere. So all you have to do is dodge them, and then there's going to be a little like soap pool that happens on the ground. It's like a small little circle. Here actually it's happening right now, and somebody has to stand in that small circle, otherwise the group wipes. Usually it's the tank or DPS. Usually like 1 or 2 or even 3 people will go in there just to be safe. And it does do a small little splash of damage, so just be aware of that as well. Lastly, the other ability that he does is called Chrono Shear, which he's doing right now. And that is going to put a heal absorb on the tank as well as a debuff that increases the amount of damage they take. I believe it's by about 200%. So you cannot dispel that debuff until the absorb shield is healed through. So just make sure you pop a heal or 2. Usually like 1 healing surge will do it, especially if it crits. And then just make sure you dispel that as soon as possible, because if the tank doesn't have a defensive up, or if they expect you to dispel it and you don't, there is a chance that they could die. But yeah, that's it. That boss is super easy. I actually really like that boss. I think it's a cool first boss for a dungeon. Like it has good mechanics that are simple to understand, but if you screw them up, then you die. So it's, in my opinion, a good boss to like get a dungeon started. Okay, so now I've put the video back to normal speed. This is probably the hardest part of the dungeon on a fortified week. This trash area right here, everything hurts so bad. Everything kind of like almost one-shots. So you'll see this guy just went down from like 80% health to 0. So if you get any of the debuffs, whether it's the Chrono Burst from these guys, the Decayed Sands or whatever it is from the smaller guys, the Bloom, whatever, you need to pop defensives, you need to dispel, you need to do whatever you can. So dealing with this first ad, the Chrono Burst, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can dispel someone right away as soon as they get out, or you can let the debuffs fall off naturally and then just make sure you have time to heal the people up. I sort of cycle depending on what cooldowns I have, depending on whether I have to move or not, depending on what else is happening. Sometimes I will let those Chrono Bursts run out by themselves, or I will dispel one if I know somebody is safe and they're okay to dispel. And then just also keep in mind with the Chrono Burst, that giant circle will activate any of those little bronze guys around, and they will immediately target either you or the DPS that activated them. So just be careful of that. Usually if you're running with a good tank, they'll be able to pick them up right away. So another dangerous mob in here is the Coalesce Moments. So they put this sand debuff on people, and I think the worst thing about it is that there's no like animation, there's nothing indicating that you're about to get hit or that they're about to do it. It just sort of happens. So you really need to be watching your unit frames very closely, and whoever gets that debuff, hopefully they have a personal that they can use, even a small one. So we have Astral Shift. I also have Stone Form, which is like a 10% DR. Anything helps, and if somebody gets that debuff as well as bloom or whatever, it's not looking good for them. So my biggest piece of advice for this area would be to use all of your cooldowns very, very liberally, very generously. Basically you're going to be cycling through all of your cooldowns, maybe even multiple times before you get to the boss, and that's okay. So you'll see there, I actually popped Slink. I've already popped Ancestral Guidance. I've already popped Mana Tide with Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. And I will be popping probably Ascendance and Healing Tide before this is over as well. So these anomalies, they're going to cast something called Bloom. It's going to put a magic dispel on the tank as well as one other DPS. In my opinion, it's always like you kind of need to dispel the DPS, otherwise they will die, unless they have a way of getting it off of themselves, themselves, maybe with like Stone Form or something. We actually have a priest, so we can mass dispel some of them, which is nice, but otherwise the tank just needs to be able to survive with the buff on them. That's basically what the mechanic was designed, I believe, because there's no way a DPS can survive with it. But what makes it extra tricky is that these anomalies also do like a tank buster dragon breath on them called On Twist. So that coupled with the bloom is something that's very tough for a tank to handle, especially on these hierarchies. And then if you add bolstering into the mix, it's just like extra not good. So with all that being said, as you can see, this is not perfect. We still have some deaths, but thankfully this is a key where you don't give up. As long as you have, I think it's like 17, 18 minutes coming out of this boss, you should be fine to time the key. Like you're still on track. So yeah, you'll see we have a few deaths here. It's kind of unavoidable, especially with bolstering. I mean, I guess you could say we could maybe pop defensives a little bit better. Unfortunately for a tank, as a shaman, like there's not a whole lot you can do for them other than spam healing search and make sure your earth shield is on them. And maybe if you have spirit link up, which I didn't at that time, you may be able to save them. But yeah, otherwise you're basically just using your cooldowns to keep everybody else alive. This is also a great area to be popping Spirit Walker's Grace, because basically the cherry on top for this area is those stupid swirlies that just end up on the ground. It's already like this area is hard enough, and now you have to like dodge in the middle of healing all of this nonsense. It's just, I think whoever designed this is mad in like the best way possible. I think this is amazing. I really hope they don't nerf it, as annoying as it is, just because it is. It's funny to me to like watch how chaotic it is, and it's fun when you do it properly. Like, I am not happy that we had a few deaths here. I'm happy we were able to get through it, but sometimes you'll do this and you actually will get through with no deaths just because you play perfectly and everybody's using their defensives as they need to. And yeah, it's a good feeling. It's definitely, this is why we play this game, right? All right, so you're just going to slowly work your way through all of these packs. Your tank should not be double or triple pulling or anything. Just take it nice and slow. And there you go. So these coalesce moments, personally, these are the hardest to deal with, I think, because that dot hits so hard and it's just so random, and you'll usually have 2 of them out at a time. And on a bolstering week, some of them might be bolstered as well. So that's where the majority of my cooldowns are going towards. It's also easy to run out of mana in this spot, so don't be afraid to tell your tank, hey, wait a second, I need to drink, because giving you the 20-30 seconds to drink is better than having, DPS die during the pulls and then, take longer to kill everything. All right, going into this boss, this is actually, okay, let me rewind. I was about to say this is one of the hardest bosses of the season, but now that I've had it figured out, I disagree with that. I actually think it's quite an easy boss as long as you are able to follow exactly what I'm about to lay out. So the best way to handle this boss, I found, is to make a priority list and to make that known, figure it out before you start the dungeon, especially on a tyrannical week. So your priority list should be your squishiest players at the top and your tankiest players at the bottom. So for this composition, we have 2 Demon Hunter DPS, a Priest DPS, and myself as a Shaman healer. So my priority list is the Priest as top priority, me second, one of the DHs, Maso, as the third, and then Volton, the other DH, as the fourth. And basically this is your dispel order. So whoever's top priority will get dispelled first, and and then it basically goes down the list. So for this set right here, we had Emigosa, who's the priest, as well as Volton, who's the demon hunter. So Emigosa in this situation would get dispelled first because she's higher priority, and then Volton would be dispelled last. Basically what this does is it lets your group know who needs to go to the light area right away for the first dispel, and who needs to go to the dark area right away for the second, or just, to handle the first dispel, you like get the DR being in the dark, and then you let your dispel fall off in the light. So for this set, we have Maso, who would be dispelled first because he's higher on the list. So Volton goes to the dark area right away, and then he lets his expire during the light area, while we all go to the dark afterwards. And it basically just works like clockwork. This is a really easy way to do this boss. And if you're in comms, like if you're in Discord or you have communication with your group, what I would do as a healer is I would call out as well, just to keep people in the loop. So for instance, the next set, which is about to come out now, here we go. I would say, all right, Maso, you're getting dispelled first. Everybody else go dark. And then as soon as he gets dispelled, everybody else is, him and everybody is going to go dark, while it falls off of Volton, who's going to go into the light. And there you go. That's pretty much it for this fight. That's the best way to make it easy. Other than that, you'll see I basically rotate for a cooldown for each one. So for each set, I'm either using Ancestral Guidance, which I would normally start with as my first one, so I have it later. Mana Tide Totem with Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem, Ascendance, Healing Tide. Slink you could use in an emergency here, however it's not super helpful just because everybody is moving around so much, and honestly I would rather save it for the dragons in the next area. So my advice is don't use Slink unless you absolutely have to for this fight. And while you're healing through the debuffs, make sure you have a Cloudburst down, because it's going to be a nice emergency button that you can pop if anybody comes really close to death, or if you're able to just keep it down for the full duration, it's going to be a nice tool to top everybody up after the debuffs go out. So here we have myself and Maso. I'm higher on the priority list, so I get dispelled first, and then Maso would get to let his fall off afterwards. One more thing I'll mention about this boss that is sort of like a bug, but I actually don't think they're going to fix it. So I guess it's just the way the boss is going to be. If you're moving during the dispels, especially if you're the person with the debuff, there is a chance that you're going to take a double hit from the dispel and you're going to die immediately. And if you're watching this video and you've done this boss, you've probably seen this happen at least once, where somebody goes from full health to 0 only with one dispel, and then you check their death log and they've actually gotten hit twice. And that's just because they're moving during the window of the dispel, and then they're actually getting hit by that line twice. Once again, like I said, it's technically a bug because I don't think the fight was designed for that to happen, but I don't think it is avoidable just because of the way that the fight is designed. Like that whole circle, the whole point of it being able to hit you twice is because if you dispel it in the slow area, it becomes big and it takes really slow to fan out, and you have to sort of walk through it and you're going to get hit 2 or 3 times. So I think because of the inherent design in that mechanic, there's no way for them to make it so it doesn't hit you twice if you're sort of moving through it at the wrong time, even if it gets dispelled in the fast. So all of that was a very long-winded way of saying make sure you and your group are staying still as the debuffs are happening. All right, so moving on to this third area. This area I think is probably one of the most fun. This reminds me very much of Kajin from last season, which was the third boss in Halls of Infusion, just because it's constant rot damage. So these dragons are a lot of fun. If you're feeling up for it, so for instance, this is a 28, so we're just playing it safe and we're just pulling the one dragon here. However, if you have all of your cooldowns and it's maybe I don't even know if I tried on a 27 without lust, but if it's a 26 or lower and you feel confident in your healing ability, you can absolutely double heal the dragons, no problem, even with no lust. Just make sure your group focuses one down first. But anyways, the trick to these dragons is to make sure you have Riptide on as many people as possible, as well as your tier set buff, which is the Tidal Reservoir. Make sure your healing rain is down at all times. And then just make sure you are using Healing Surge, Healing Wave as needed, and Chain Heals with the High Tide procs. You can even use Chain Heal without High Tide. Just make sure that your Cloudburst Totem is down as well. Otherwise, it's less efficient, and you're kind of just you're not wasting mana because it's still healing people. But there's more efficient ways to do it. You can also cycle through all of your cooldowns. So for this one, I just used Mana Tide Totem for Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. And I probably could have used other cooldowns as well, but try not to use more than 2 per dragon. Otherwise, you're going to run out at the end and just not have anything. If your group has any defensive utility as well. They should be helping you out here. So for instance, we have 3 Demon Hunters, so we have lots of darknesses that we can use. But other than that, once again, I use 1 or 2 cooldowns per dragon. So for this one, I've opened with Ancestral Guidance, which is really awesome for this type of trash. Just make sure once again that your Cloudburst is down during that, so that you get that extra burst of healing once it expires, and that's going to top everybody up. So this dragon is at 50% HP. I've already used Ancestral Guidance. I basically have a choice here. It's like I could burn through another cooldown. It's no big deal. I won't need it for the beginning of the next boss. However, we had AMZ here, which our tank just popped. So, yeah, sorry. Our tank is a Death Knight, not a Demon Hunter. So we only have 2 darknesses. We don't have 3, but we also have the AMZ. So that's another bonus there. But yeah, and once again, you've probably noticed, but there is an ability tracker on the top left. So if you are struggling with these dragons, just, take another look at, see what I'm using to heal them. It works every time. Like I've never had trouble with these dragons. I even think on a 28, if we had Lust, we could easily do a double dragon if I had all my cooldowns up, and we'd be fine. I think doing a double dragon without Lust on a 28 is like healable for sure. I could probably heal it for a bit. I just don't know if I'd be able to heal it like long enough that one of the dragons actually dies before we start dying, just because I'd either run out of mana or I'd run out of cooldowns and run out of Cloudburst totems, and then you're just kind of stuck dead in the water a little bit. But I think if you have good communication and comms, and you have lots of group defensives like we do, we probably could have double pulled the dragons if we really wanted to, and worked some way out using group defensives and gotten through it. However, because like I said, the timer is pretty lenient here, we just decided to play it safe and just do 1 dragon at a time. All right, so I was once again being conservative with my cooldowns here. I could have popped everything and I still would have been okay, because you don't really need anything for the boss. And honestly, maybe that would have been smarter, because then I would have more mana and I wouldn't have to drink as long here before we start the boss. But once again, was just playing it safe. I just wanted some stuff up for this boss just in case. So this boss, I actually put out a really good guide for this boss. This boss is the only reason that I find this scary even in the slightest, is that it's very much a group effort. There's little control that you have if people mess it up. There's only so much you can do. But I'll walk you through the general strat. And once again, if you want to see the in-depth, slowed down, detailed video, you can check it out on my channel for the Blight of Galakrond. All right, so this first phase, super easy. He's just going to pick random targets to put the corrosion debuff on. My tip for this is that you always have time to either Healing Surge or Healing Wave that person who's getting the dot before having to move out of the swirls. The swirls actually take a good 3 seconds to fall down. So you'll see I'm getting it here. I'm going to sit there, I'm going to spam Healing Surge on myself, and then I'm going to move out of the dot afterwards, after I get that at least 1 Healing Surge off. And it's funny, I actually learned that the hard way. I remember the first time doing this on a 23 Tyrannical. I actually got flamed. I was being yelled at by my DPS player because they were basically dying from the dot right away, because I was under the impression that I had to move right away, from the swirls, because on the lower levels that I had done, it didn't matter. The people didn't die right away. So even on a 22, I had the time to move out of this swirly first and then heal. But once I got to the 23, and this was also before we had as much gear as we have now, but the people were dying before I even, if I took the time to move before healing, they would die. So that was a good lesson for me to just, sit there, plant, get a Healing Surge off on that target, make sure they're safe, and then move out of the swirl, because you do have time. Moving into the second phase, this phase is obviously a little bit harder. You're basically, the debuff is going to go out. Somebody has to hold it for a bit. So for instance, this one came out, I popped Astral Shift so that I could hold it for a good little time before the winds start. And then I can pass it to the tank without having to worry about him passing it back to anybody and getting mind controlled here. All right, so this was a little bit of a mess up. Me and the tank walked into each other right there, and I took the debuff back from him. Thankfully, I reincarnate up, so it's not a big deal, but that was just on both of us for not really watching where we were going. And that's also the funny thing about this fight too, is it can go south pretty quickly, just in the way of if you accidentally walk over someone with the debuff, it's very easy for the plan to get derailed very quickly. So this is actually not my finest moment. I definitely could have healed that a little bit better. So we just lost our priest. Thankfully, we do have 2 battle reses, so it's not that big of a deal. But there was more I could have done there. What I think dying sort of threw me for a loop, because normally what I would have done there is I would have popped my Mana Tide Totem. So because you're going to get 3 wins in this phase normally, I usually use Spirit Walker's Grace for the first one, I use Ancestral Guidance for the second one, and then I use Mana Tide Totem for the third one. But because I died and my brain is small and I wasn't able to think about what to do right away after resing myself, I didn't pop Mana Tide Totem when I should have, and I didn't get that Spirit Walker's Title Totem buff. So that's the reason that kind of went south. But thankfully the third phase is good. So if you're running with Night Elves or Hunters, you can meld or feign death the dots as they're coming out, and then you don't even have to deal with them. So I think you get the most value out of cheesing the dot like that in the third phase, because that is when the dot lasts the longest. Even though the second phase is kind of scary with the wins, the third phase is more likely where you're actually going to mess up passing the dot to the wrong people and then just having people die because of that. So if you can get rid of the dots, my personal advice is to get rid of them in P3, unless it's a really high tyrannical key and you can't deal with it with the wins as well, in which case you would prioritize getting rid of it in phase 2. So because we're cheesing the dots here in this third phase, this isn't the best guide for you because you can't see what it would be like if you didn't have that cheese. So like I said, if you're interested in seeing this fight done real, done with no dot cheeses, go check out my channel. There's an actual tyrannical guide for this boss. All right, so now we're about to go into the last area. Like I said, depending on your group, you may actually skip this entire area. I think what we're doing is we're killing up to the last pack, and then we're skipping that. So we actually don't even get the chance to use our DPS pots twice anyways, because we are invising. But thankfully our pots are up at some point towards the end of the fight, just because that fight is so long. We also lusted on the dragons there in that third phase when it came up, just because we knew that we were either going to be fine without lust for this boss, or it would come up at the very end during that last burn phase. So, and actually that's exactly what happens. The timing was literally perfect. I think a lust comes up just as the final burn happens. All right, so this trash is not hard if you can get proper stops. So these stone bolts really hurt. They do count as a bleed though. So if you're a dwarf or if you have an evoker in the group, they can caught the bleed, or you can stone form it, or anybody else who has any other way to get rid of a bleed can get rid of it if a cast does go off. But I mean, what's better than that is just not letting any casts go off at all. So just try to coordinate your AoE stops and have people use interrupts. Normally in most groups, I feel like if you're not in a coordinated group, won't pull this big for this pack on a fortified week, just because if you don't get your stops, it can wipe you, and you could lose a lot of time here trying to run back and kill these because they do have a lot of health. But we are actually a coordinated group for this. We were in Discord, so it was a lot easier to say, the stops and all that stuff. And then as you can see, there's also a Chrono Weaver in this pack, so I was stuck on that, interrupting their cast, because once again, it's super deadly. And if you're running this on the Bolstering Week this week, you're definitely going to want to focus down the Epoch Rippers first, because once again, as you saw in the beginning, if they get bolstered and they jump on people, it can be very lethal very quickly. All right, so we had somebody who was unable to invis through, so they're just going to run over and die, and then I'm going to res them before we start this boss. All right, so Galakrond. This is actually probably my favorite fight of the season. Reason being is, first of all, I just think the lore behind it, the story that's happening, is pretty epic. It's cool to be able to fight with Chromie. And I just think it's a really cool concept. But second, this fight is a marathon, and it took me, I feel like I grasped the concept of it pretty quickly, and it was fun to heal. But it was tough to actually figure out how to do this on higher levels without running out of mana and burning through everything that I had. So yeah, I think I've really cracked the code for this boss, and I'm going to tell you exactly how. So for this first set of the Stonecracker Barrage, don't use Slink. I know it's very tempting, but try to use a different group DR, Maybe if you need to use like Ancestral Guidance or whatever, just use something else to heal through that, because you're going to want to use your Slink on the second set and then have it up again for the final burn phase as well, and that's going to help you out. You could potentially use it for the first and third shield, but then you're not going to have it for the final burn, and the only reason I don't advise that is because it has screwed me over on a few keys, just not having Slink during that final shield. All right, so going into this first Earth Surge phase, I basically cycle through my cooldown. So first I use Ancestral Guidance, and then second I use Mana Tide Totem, and that should be enough to get through this first phase. Keep in mind that I also put an Earth Shield on Chromie, and I'm sort of passively healing her with Healing Waves and Riptides in between healing the group. Another good ability to use here is Spirit Walker's Grace. So I actually didn't use it because I didn't need it here, but there's no reason not to use it because it has a short enough cooldown that it will be up for the next one. Also, so I'm trying to keep my Cloudburst totems down during those phases and fill them up as much as possible, because what I'm also trying to do is be conservative with my mana. I don't just want to spam everything. That's why I'm trying not to use Chain Heal as much as I possibly can. I'm trying to only use it with High Tide or in an emergency when I just really need to heal people up. But I really want to avoid using Chain Heal as much as possible because it is going to burn through my mana. This is also the reason why I have Mana Tide Totem, and it's also the reason why I pop Mana Tide Totem so early, is because I want to get as many uses with it throughout the fight. You can actually get up to 3, I believe. Okay, so if you have Night Elves in the group, they can meld that dot. There's also other things. I think Feign Death works as well, and there's a few other immunities that can work for it. So if you have somebody in the group with the ability to do that, they absolutely should, and they should do it towards the end of the cast, because that's just going to increase the time before he starts doing his Stonecracker Barrage. For that second one, you'll see that I popped Slink, and then we're going to go into this phase, and it's going to be basically the same thing. I just have a different set of cooldowns that I'm going to be using. So first, I'm going to be using Healing Tide Totem. Pretty much right away as this phase starts, I'm going to put a Cloudburst Totem down, and then I'm going to just do my regular healing. Next, I'm going to use Ancestral Guidance because it's coming up right away. And once again, if you're using Ancestral Guidance, try to pair it with the Cloudburst Totem because that is like extra Giga value. Also, something I'm not doing here, but that I should be, is you basically should be using your Astral Shift for every Stonecracker Barrage, even if you don't have the dot, just because it will be up for the next one. Okay, this shield is lasting pretty long, so I actually used Ascendance there, but I absolutely did not need to because we literally broke the shield right afterwards. So I'm just thinking to myself, I need to get some sort of weak aura or something that shows the amount that's left in his shield so I don't make that mistake. But I knew that I was going to have other cooldowns up for the next phase. I'm going to have Ancestral Guidance again, I'm going to have Mana Tide Totem, so I'll be absolutely fine. So we're going to go through one more shield here. You need to get him to 90% to actually phase him. And he's at 94, and basically it's like 40%. Like you can think of each 1% for him is like 10% is a good way I think of it. So now we're down to 30%. So I'm knowing here that I'm going to get another shield. I'm looking at what I have on my bar, and I have Mana Tide Totem, so Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. And I have, actually that's it. So hopefully, I mean, Ancestral Guidance might be up during the shield phase, but I'm looking here and I'm like, I'm kind of dry, so I'm just gonna have to be careful. Thankfully, I still have a lot of mana left. I have 50%. I also have Mana Tide Totem and my mana pot, so I actually have more around like 70% mana. So with that in mind, I technically could probably just spam Chain Heal here and I'd be okay, but I'm not going to do that, hopefully. So there we go. As this phase started, I used Mana Tide Totem with Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. And then when I have that down, I'm just going to spam. Even if people don't need the healing, I'm going to spam my Chain Heals and my Healing Wave while my Cloudburst is down, because I'm getting extra value. They cost 50% mana and they're super fast, so I can basically just chain cast them and fill up that Cloudburst. So that's why you'll see me sort of casting those abilities even when people don't actually need them. Now I see I also have Ancestral Guidance up. However, I remember thinking at this point, crap, I don't have anything else for the final shield, which we're probably going to push him into very shortly after this. So that's why I'm saving Ancestral Guidance here. That being said, I probably would have been fine had I actually used it, but I'm looking at my group, I'm seeing we're all pretty healthy. The shield is probably almost dead, so there's no point in wasting that ability when I could use it for that final shield. Okay, so we get through here. You also notice I didn't heal Chromie there at all. And the reason for that is because I know we're going to push him before the next Stonecracker Barrage, so I don't have to worry about her dying. All right, so he's at 91%, which, like I said, if you do the little ratio, it's actually like 10% help. So we're about to push him here into the final phase. And we still have a good 12 seconds before Extinction Blast. So we're actually very good on time here. And I also see that we have about 10 seconds on Lust. So once again, this all lined up very, very nicely for us. Here we go. We push him into this final phase. I usually start this with a Slink just to, get everybody situated because you're kind of running in spot while you're still taking a lot of damage. Then I popped Ancestral Guidance. I'm going to put my Healing Rain down. I'm going to shoot out as much DPS as I can with Lava Burst and Lightning Bolt. And then in between some casts, I'm going to use Chain Heals, Healing Waves, Healing Surge, whatever I need to use to keep the group alive. And then, yeah, that's it. So normally that phase will actually last a little bit longer, especially if you're doing this on a Tyrannical key. So that's where you really need to be a little bit more careful with your cooldowns. And that's why I try to save at least 1 or 2 things for that shield. Like I said, Slink is probably the best option you have to save there, which is why I always use Slink on the second shield rather than the first, so that I have it up for that. If you want a more in-depth Galakrond guide that is on a Tyrannical key, you can actually check out my channel. I do have one that was from last week. I think it's only a 25, so it would be very comparable to this. But yeah, if you want just more like a slowed down version, you can go and check that one out. But yeah, once again, this is 28 Fall. I believe it's the first one that a Resto Shaman has done in the world. But once again, it's somewhat early in the week, so there's probably going to be a few more done this week. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this guide, and I'll see you in the next one.